Hey, so I came across this video yesterday by fellow Torontonian Wes Boss, and it looked like an interesting problem. It was this problem where you have three different arrays with what looks like parsed CSV data, and you need to combine them into a single object. I thought, wow, that's a really great example of programming challenges that we run into on a daily basis. In the description of the video, he suggests that people try to write solutions with different methods and in different languages and post the solutions. So I thought that's what I'd give. That's what I do today. I'd give that a shot. So I decided I'm going to whip something up in CoffeeScript, and I looked through his video. It doesn't look like he used this approach really. So this should be something new, hopefully. So let's give it a shot. Looks like the data is over here. So I'm going to grab the data, and I'm going to do this in CoffeeScript. So I tried to make the text in the browser big enough to see on video. We're going to just post. I'm just going to use this try CoffeeScript REPL to give us like an easy way to write the code and run it. So we don't need all this. We don't need a lot of this extra stuff. Like all these commas, they're optional. But we're going to just leave them in. It doesn't matter. Okay, so we've got these three arrays, and each one of these arrays looks a lot like what you would get if you parse a CSV or an Excel file. It's like you get a header row in each one, and then that's followed by a bunch of like data rows. And like, yeah, I can't even count on one hand the number of times I've done something similar to this. It's always different, but it quite often follows a similar pattern. There's a really good library that you can also use for parsing CSV data specifically called Pop-A-Parse. Highly recommend it. It's very good, but we're not going to need to use that here. The solution I want to sort of like take a stab at is uses something called an identity map. And an identity map is really just, it's a fancy way to say it's an object that's keyed by ID. So I'll give you an example of what I mean. Like you got this object, and inside this object, you've got, let's say Susan is ID 3. So this is going to be Susan. And then in here, you're going to have, so this is an object with name, Susan, ID 3, etc. So that way, if you want to find Susan's record, you just look up you get her ID, and you find the object that way. So that being said, let's take a look at parsing one of these arrays. So let's. So basically what we want to do is we want to turn each one of these into, we want to add each one of these records to an identity map, and we want to create objects out of them, which is, I think, similar to what Wes did in his video. I think he created objects out of them as well. So let's say we've got an empty identity map for people, and what we want to do is we want to update people. And that's going to be a function, and it's going to take in the people array that we want to update. So this is going to be like the identity map. So I'm just going to identity map, and we're also going to take in a bunch of rows, like a CSV, right? And this is going to be like an array. So people, it's going to be an object. So I like putting these defaults in. They serve two purposes. One, we can omit this if we want, and it will default to an empty object or array. And two, it sort of gives you a type hint without having to go full TypeScript or use a type system. Yeah, I find it useful just for readability later. Okay, cool. So the one thing that we're going to need to do is this first row. These first rows are always the header row, and this is sort of like different. This is not data that we want in our system. So we're going to use destructuring, and we're going to basically rows split this equals CSV. And often when I'm doing something like this, what I'll do is I'll actually just destructure it right in the arguments, because why not? Then we've just got our header and our rows. Cool. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to cycle through all the rows of data. So for row in rows, what we need to do on every row is we need to find the ID. So for this, the ID is 3. So that's, but how do we know that that's the ID? What we have to do is we have to reference the header. So I guess what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to figure out which one of these cells in the header contains ID. Like what's the position of the ID in this data. So we're going to want to find the ID index. Oops, ID index. There we go. And that's going to be the header index of, and we're going to look for the word ID. So that's going to give us the index of the ID. And then what we can do is, well, we can do this first. We don't need to do that inside. So now for every row, we're going to find the actual ID. So the ID is going to be the row at the ID index. So that's going to give us the actual row. We could also just pull this out. We don't need to store this in a variable. We could look it up every time just like this, and that would give us the ID. And then what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to find the person object in the people identity map that we want to operate on. So we're going to try and just get the person object, or person is people at ID. And that may not exist. So we start off with an empty map. And if we find something that doesn't exist, so we should initialize this with an empty object first. So we want to make sure that if people ID doesn't exist, then we set it equal to just an empty object, so we can have an object. And in cases like this, where we're sort of like doing a double assignment like this, we're setting everything equal to the same thing. What we can actually do is we can just set it equal to this. So this is going to be evaluated first, which is that people ID gets initialized with an empty object, and then we capture that as person just so we have something sensible to make reference to later on. And then now that we have our person, which may or may not be blank or may or may not contain existing data, what we can do is for every value that we come across in this array, what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to assign it to an object key based on the header row. So we're going to have value index in row. So for every value and index of that value in the row, what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to assign this to the key. And what is the key? And the key is going to be whatever is at that index in the header. So it's going to be the header index. So the person header index, whatever the index is. So for the first one, it's going to be name, and the value is going to be Bob. For the next one, the header index is going to point to ID, and the value is going to be 2, and so on. So that's pretty much it. So now we've updated our people array, and at the end of this function, we're going to return people. So we can test this now. We can say, let's update people, and we'll just pass in the people array or the people object, the empty people object up here, and we'll pass in array 1 to see what we get back. And let's console.log that. All right. So this gives us a bunch of stuff. Console, I saw a mention of console table. I think that's a great tool. So let's try that as well. Okay, cool. So this is giving us an object, index 1, John, 2, Bob, 3, Susan, 4, Ben. Okay, it seems like all the stuff is coming in. Cool is true. Excellent. So now what we want to do is we want to merge the next array into the next array's data into this same data. So what we'll want to do is we will want to set what this gives us back, people, to the people map that we were putting in. So we can say update people with our 2 as well, and that should we'll need to console.log or console table people at this point and see what we get back. So we should have some extra stuff. We've got the height data here. Okay, so the height for John is 45. Yeah, okay, so that matches up. Height for Ben is 43. Yeah, okay, so it seems like it's working, and we can do the same thing for array 3, and hopefully we'll also have parent, and yes, we do. Okay, cool. So this part here isn't great though. So I think maybe what we'd want to do is we'd want to sort of make a function that takes all of these arrays and then allows us to just sort of like iterate through them. So let's call this update all people. All people, and this can be a function that takes similarly the people identity map, and it can take or maybe we don't need a people identity map. Maybe we'll just take all the input. We'll just take all the input here, and then what we can do is we can say for CSV in input, we will want to update people with the people object and the CSV. And so we should initialize people here, and then we can say people equals that, and then at the end of this we will have people. So what's this? Update all people. So let's console table this. Update all people, array 1, array 2, array 3, and we'll see what we get back. Hopefully this works. Okay, so it's giving us the same export, which is good. So we don't actually need to initialize this identity map anymore because we're doing it here, which I think is appropriate because we're trying to create a new list of people. Cool. And I guess the original really didn't want an object back like this. It didn't want the identity map. It just wanted a list of all the updated people values. So that's easy enough to do. Because we get an object back here, what we can do is we can just say object.values and pass that in, and that should give us our array back, which it does. An array of 4, and each one has all the properties. Anyway, I thought that was a great example of just like common programming tasks, I think the identity map is a really great solution for a lot of these things. So I thought I'd just give it a try here and show it off. So yeah, I hope you learned something great. Yeah, if you have any suggestions on what I could have done better, or if you want to try this yourself in a different language or using a different strategy, I highly recommend a link back to Wes's video, and you should comment there. Anyway, thanks everyone.